On my 50th birthday, my husband gave me a gravestone with my name on it. He handed me a long, narrow box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a velvet ribbon, something a florist might use for a bouquet. 50 people filled our backyard under a rented tent strung with warm bulbs. Rain had threatened all morning, but Portland had decided to be kind, leaving us with a washed blue sky and air that smelled faintly of pine and smoke from the neighbor's grill. Our friends from the school district were there, a few from Thomas's contracting business and my assistant principal, who had insisted on coordinating everything so I wouldn't have to. There was a sheet cake with crimson raspberries, a table piled with cards, a metal ice tub sweating over bottles of sparkling cider and discounted champagne. "Open it," Thomas said, beaming. His smile had always been a marvel. White and easy, the smile that won bids and disarmed strangers. He'd gotten new cufflinks for the occasion, little silver squares that flashed when he moved. He'd slicked his dark hair back and pressed his only navy suit. He'd put on the ring I bought him at the beginning, when we counted dollars and stretched the life of our Honda by changing the oil ourselves. I undid the velvet ribbon and the tape. The box was heavier than it looked. Inside was a rectangle of polished granite, gray veined with white. The engraving was neat and sharp, sandblasted to a pale bevel. Evelyn Grace Moore. 1975. A line, then nothing. There was a breathlessness to the pause that followed, as if someone had pulled all the oxygen from the tent. The dash after my birth year looked like a thin knife waiting for a hand. The first laugh came from somewhere to my left, brittle and confused, then another, relieved. Thomas raised his hands. "Oh, come on," he said. "It's a gag." He reached for the stone to show it off, like I might laugh too if I just saw it from a better angle. "You know that headstone job I did for the Whitman family up at Greenwood? They had this extra granite cut, wrong shade. The shop let me keep it. I thought, 50 is the new 40, so let's mark it like a milestone. A marker." He winced at his own joke and plowed forward. "We can use it as a garden stone. Put it by the rosemary. Or, hey, paperweight for all the papers you bring home?" There was more laughter, clinking. Someone yelled, "That's dark, man," with the kind of admiration that meets bad taste. My assistant principal, Nikki, gave me a quick worried glance, the kind that says, "I'm here if you want to be done." I smiled and pretended my spine hadn't turned to glass. "Thank you," I said, and lifted the stone, which was heavier than it looked. "I'll cherish it." I set it on the patio table next to the cake knife where every guest on their way to a second slice could read my name and the empty waiting line. I cut slices and accepted toasts and stood for pictures. People hugged me and whispered that 50 looked good on me. They meant it. They were kind. I was the principal who went to basketball games and chaperoned dances and pressed for new HVAC in the oldest classrooms. I was the woman who ordered extra pizzas for kids who missed dinner, who kept a stash of deodorant and tampons in the nurse's office for whoever needed them. People liked to like me. I liked it too, most days. The week before, our district had given me a plaque for Lifetime Service and Equity Initiatives, a line of words as tidy as a sidewalk. I took photos with my students' parents and with Thomas, whose smile never faltered. He kissed my cheek as if we were a postcard couple. An hour after the last guest left and the rental company loaded the chairs, I set the granite slab on the kitchen counter and ran hot water over the knife to cut the extra cake. "A gravestone?" I asked, not quite looking at him. "It's a granite joke," he said, hands in his pockets. "You always say you like literature with a dark streak. This is, literary." "A headstone is not literary, Thomas." "It's modern," he said. "Edgy." He chuckled at his own word choice, and then, seeing I wouldn't be warmed by it, sighed. "Ev, I didn't mean anything by it." He leaned in to kiss my forehead. "You know I'd bury myself before I buried you." When he left to walk the recycling bin to the curb, I traced the dash with the pad of my finger. It was perfectly even, colder than the counter. 52 degrees, maybe, the kind of cold that takes a while to notice but settles in your palms. That night, after I loaded the dishwasher and set the coffee pot for morning, I climbed into bed with a library book and pretended to read until the lines turned to fog. Around 2, a sound pulled me back from the edge of sleep. A whisper, a floorboard. The house was 100 years old and settled in slow complaints. But the cadence was wrong. It was human. I sat up and listened. In the hall, behind the bedroom door, a voice I knew so well it was practically inside my chest. "We can't wait much longer," Thomas said, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry, which meant it carried more. "No, listen, the premium's already hit. If the window passes, they'll send that nurse again, and she's been edgy about the blood pressure deal because—" He broke off. I know. That's why timing matters. I'm not talking about months. I'm talking weeks. Yes, we keep it clean. No questions. Accidental rider is the whole point. The contractor's accident, sure, but I'm not that dumb." A pause. I could hear him breathing. He covered the phone and muttered something. My pulse slid into my ears. "Margaret," he said. And the way he said his sister's name tightened my throat. "Don't be a martyr. You'll get yours. We clear the debt. We land the Midtown bid. The rest falls in place. After the claim settles, we're out." He listened, snorted softly. She won't suspect a thing. She never does." I froze in the dark, unmoving under my feigned sleep. The bedroom door clicked open. He walked in and stood a long moment, a dark pillar as if calibrating his face to sleep before slipping into bed. His shoulder grazed mine. He was stiff as a board and smelled faintly of gasoline and an unfamiliar cologne, something sharp and citrusy, not the cedar he wore. The alarm came at 6. He was up before it, cheerful. "Coffee's on," he said in a voice that belonged to a morning show. He kissed my cheek and whistled down the hall. In the kitchen, he was unreasonably affectionate, dragging me into half-dances over the tile. He had never been a morning person, and yet here he was, cinnamon toast and a scrambled egg in a pan, a mimosa poured from the leftover champagne, which we never drank on a random Monday. He offered to drive me to school, to pick me up, to take me to lunch at a place with salmon and white tablecloths. He had never once suggested lunch on a weekday. He passed me my phone and smiled at the green case he'd bought for me last Christmas. "New password?" he asked. He meant to make it a joke. It landed as a stone. "Same one," I said, and typed it with a steady finger. He watched in a way that felt like recording. At noon, the mailroom clerk buzzed me. I walked down through the hall where someone had painted a mural of a river with kids from every background holding hands. The fluorescent lights hummed. Nikki handed me a thick envelope with my name printed in a corporate font. "Evergreen Mutual," she said. "Insurance stuff?" I took it back to my office and sat in the chair that had molded itself to me over a decade. Inside was a glossy policy packet and a letter. "We're pleased to confirm your coverage with an accidental death rider in the amount of $2 million. The signature page included my name in an ugly electronic scrawl I would never have written. Beneficiary, Thomas A. Moore, 100%. My hand went cold around the envelope. The room, which moments ago contained 2 potted ficuses, a pennant from my first year, and a painting of Mount Hood a student's grandmother had made me, suddenly felt like a photograph of itself, a set with props. I checked my email. The confirmation had arrived the week prior in a spam folder. "Thank you for your application," it said. "We appreciate your trust." A light tap on my door. Nikki leaned in. "Everything okay?" "I think my husband thinks I'm stupid," I said, and heard how strange it sounded. She closed the door and came around the desk. "Is there something I should—" "I'm okay," I said, because I needed more than 5 minutes for what the next hour would require. "Can you hold the fort for an hour?" She looked at my face, where I had decades of practice at composure. "I've got it," she said. "Go." I carried the envelope to my car and sat in the parking lot where students cut across the grass in a diagonal that the district never could stop. I called the number on the letter. After 3 rings, a woman with a crisp voice answered. "Thank you for calling Evergreen Mutual. This is Maria." "I'm calling about a policy," I said, and gave her my name. I read the policy number. "Yes," she said. "We have you for a $2 million accidental death policy with Ryder. I'm seeing your online signature. Congratulations?" "Congratulations?" I asked, and then softened my tone because she wasn't the problem. "I did not apply for this policy. I didn't sign that page." Who initiated this? Her fingers clicked. The applicant is listed as Thomas Moore, spouse policy for business purposes. There's a note here. Contractor liability offset. It's not unusual. For businesses that rely on a spouse's income or vice versa, has your husband spoken with our agent? I'm sure he has, I said. Is there a way to suspend this policy until I figure out what's going on? I can flag it, she said. I can also transfer you to our special investigations unit if you suspect fraud. The word sat like a door with a lock I could open if I chose to step through. Please flag it, I said. Let me call you back in a day. Of course. I'll note that no claims will be processed without verbal confirmation from you. Anything else? I paused. Please add a note to call me directly if anyone requests changes. Not my husband, me. Done, she said. I hung up and stared through the windshield at the streaks of a careless car wash. The football field beyond the lot was empty, green as a promise. Portland's sky had turned a soft pewter. I dialed a number I had not used for too long. When Rachel picked up, it was to say my name like a grin. Ev, you got old on me. Happy birthday. I think my husband is planning an accident, I said. And I didn't cry, but something in my throat felt scraped raw. She listened without interrupting while I told her everything. The gravestone, the midnight call, the policy letter with my forged name, Margaret's name like a wasp hissed through teeth, the way Thomas had watched my phone as if it were a pet he needed to train. Okay, she said when I was done, moving into the voice that had once argued first-year philosophy with me, and now argued cases for clients who needed someone to put language around the storm. Here's what we do, and we do it in order. First, we quietly separate what money you can without putting him on alert. Do not make a scene. Do not confront his sister. Do not sleep anywhere alone with him. Second, we secure evidence. You have the policy letter. Get a digital copy of anything you can. Recordings are legal in Oregon with one-party consent, so you can record your own conversations. Third, we move your assets, anything in your name, into a living trust with you as trustee. If he's planning a payout, he's also planning a way to collect everything you own. Fourth, we call SIU in the Oregon Department of Financial Regulation. You will share just enough to start a file. We will not tip our entire hand. Last, we make a public plan he can't resist walking into. Predators like attention when they think they're in control. I teach teenagers, I said. I know something about predators. Then you know, she said softly, that the first step towards safety is to stop giving them your fear and start giving them their mirror. What does that mean? It means we let Thomas watch Thomas in front of people who know what they're seeing. I laughed, shaky, and some of the ice in my chest cracked. I have a gala in 3 weeks for the literacy fund, I said. He's already told everyone he's paying for the flowers. He loves a stage. Good, she said. We'll build the stage he thinks he owns. I left the school early with Nikki's blessing and drove to the bank. The teller who had watched us age together smiled at me. I smiled back and opened a new account in my name only, transferring half the joint savings. I didn't feel righteous. I felt like a woman with a backpack in a rainstorm, unzipping everything that could get soaked so it could dry later. That night, Thomas came home with takeout pad thai from the place on Division and my favorite mango sticky rice and the candor of a man in a commercial. He poured me wine and rubbed my shoulders and told me he'd booked us a weekend away at the Columbia Gorge Hotel. We need this, he said. A reset, just us. Hike the Rowena Crest, do the lavender farm, sleep in. Sounds lovely, I said. He watched my face, gauging. In the morning, while he was in the shower, I took the granite stone from the counter and slid it into the bottom drawer of the pantry behind the spare mixer. I didn't want to see my name on my way out the door. On Wednesday, I stopped by our notary, a woman who'd been stamping our lives since we bought the house. Her office smelled like Scotch tape and lemon cleaner. She asked about the party, and I told her I had eaten too much cake. Then I asked her to notarize a signature for a living trust, the Evelyn Grace Moore Living Trust, with me as trustee and a successor named, that Thomas didn't know, my cousin Teresa, who ran a dentist's office in Eugene and would answer her phone at 2 a.m. The notary stamped the paper with a clean thump. the seal impression like a compass. At home, I told Thomas I wanted to clean out the garage so I could finally park inside. He grinned and kissed my forehead. "That's my girl," he said, and fetched a dolly. I lifted boxes and tucked a tiny camera in a corner where the rafters met the wall, its lens no bigger than a pencil eraser. I pointed it toward his locked file cabinet and the small workbench where he kept ledgers in a neat stack. He'd always liked things smooth. He labeled shelves. He calibrated the miter saw with patience. He told me disorder made him anxious and used this as a reason to leave my projects in piles and keep his in drawers. The camera caught his shadow that night. He rolled his shop stool close to the workbench and opened a gray binder. Margaret's name was on the tab. He clicked his pen. I could practically hear it. He pulled a form stamped Evergreen Mutual and slid it into a manila folder with copies of receipts from the hardware store. He added a sticky note. Rider confirmed. Window, 4 weeks. He placed the folder neatly in the top drawer of the locked cabinet. "Mom called," he said casually when he came back in. His mother had died 5 years earlier. He had never called Margaret anything but Margie, except once when he lied to a subcontractor and used her full name to make it sound official. "Do you want to go to the coast Sunday? They're doing Haystack Rock tours." "We have the gala meeting," I said. "We can skip it," he said. "You overcommit, Ev." "I'm the one who started the fund," I said. "You like your picture in the paper with a giant check." He laughed, shameless. "You caught me," he said, and his eyes were bright with something that wasn't entirely a joke. The second camera went behind a picture frame in his office. He'd turned the spare bedroom into a nerve center for bids and invoices. He locked the door now when he left, which he hadn't done before. He told me there were tools in there he didn't want to tempt the nephews with. "Kids move fast," he said. We had no children. We had never been able to settle on whether we were sad about that or relieved. He liked to imagine nieces and nephews running through, a life that claimed family without asking for work at 3 a.m. I liked to imagine quiet. On Friday, I drove to a diner with red booths and a neon sign. Rachel slid into the booth across from me and ordered coffee like a person who intends to live. She had lines at the corners of her eyes from laughter and fury in equal measure. "Here," I said, and passed her a copy of the policy, the video still of Thomas with the Evergreen folder, and my typed summary of the midnight call, the words stiff and official because if I made them conversational, I would want to cross them out. She read and pressed her hand against the table, like she needed to keep everything from slipping into the sugar caddy. "We call," she said. "Now." We called Evergreen's SIU. A man picked up with a voice like someone who'd sat through too many depositions. His name was Walter. He asked measured questions and told us how to securely upload the video, the summary, and the policy copy. "I need to tell you what happens next," he said. "I'm going to open a file and put a stop on any claim activity. I will assign an investigator. We may reach out to law enforcement. Fraud involving a policy of this size is a criminal matter in Oregon, but no arrest will happen without physical action. We can't arrest a plan. We can only document it until an attempt or another violation crosses a line." "He's planning a trip," I said. "He keeps talking about the gorge." "Do not go anywhere with him," Walter said, his voice sharpened. "Sleep with a bolt on your door if you have one. Do not eat anything he places in front of you that you haven't seen prepared." "Walter," Rachel said, "we're handling the safety plan. You get me a badge when you have one." "Badge?" "With jurisdiction," she said. "The DFR or the county DA. We'll be in touch," he said. "Miss Moore, I'm sorry this is happening." "You didn't do it," I said. On Saturday morning, Thomas woke buoyant as a man before a parade. He made omelets and sang part of a song from a decade ago and asked if I wanted to go try paddleboarding on the Willamette. It was February. He caught his own silliness and laughed. "Kidding," he said, "but we could drive the old road up the gorge, just look at the river, clear our heads." "I promised Nikki I'd help sort the auction baskets for the gala," I said. "We asked the coffee shops for gift cards, and someone has to bundle them with mugs and ribbon. I'm the ribbon person." "Later?" he asked. "Soon," I said. He studied me. I studied him back, and for a beat the performance fell away, leaving a flatness in his eyes I had not wanted to notice, ever. We had been married 26 years, and our marriage had been a series of seasons we mostly accepted. It He was charming and impulsive. I was careful and steady. He bid jobs and ordered lumber and stood on roofs. I wrote grants and went to school board meetings and sat on bleachers. We ate spaghetti at the counter and fell asleep on the couch and texted each other jokes about our most difficult students and clients. When we fought quietly, with sighs that lasted days. I had convinced myself that endurance was proof of love. It had never occurred to me that endurance could be convenience in a nice suit. That afternoon, I found Margaret's text on Thomas's tablet by accident. He'd left it on the kitchen table to charge. I didn't mean to look. It lit up as I walked by, screaming with its simple banner. Margaret, the brake shop can do Monday. You just drive it by. No paper trail. He walked in as my finger hovered over the screen. I put my hand flat on the table as if smoothing a wrinkle that hadn't existed. "Want to go see a movie?" I asked. Something dumb. Something about a dog that saves a town. He glanced toward the tablet and then away, calculating what I'd seen. "I have paperwork," he said lightly. "Rain check?" He kissed my cheek like punctuation and left the tablet on the table. The message remained. A second text landed. Margaret. "Also, the generator guys can loan one for the cabin in case." I took a photo of the screen and forwarded it to Rachel, to Walter, to my own email with a subject line that would not trigger curiosity. Recipes. Then I baked banana bread because someone at the gala would need to feel like the world was ordinary. 2 days later, at the school, one of my former students came by. Amaya had graduated 7 years prior and now wore a city ID badge. She had become an inspector with the Department of Financial Regulation. She sat on the edge of the chair like a person who has somewhere else to be. "Miss Moore," she said, "we got a heads up from an SIU contact named Walter. He asked if we had anyone who knew you. He didn't give details, just said it might help if someone you trust talked you through what enforcement can and can't do. I can't be your investigator, but I can tell you this. If anyone tries to cash a policy like this, or if we have recordings that show intent coupled with steps toward harm, we can act. We can get a warrant. We can talk to a DA. She leaned forward. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said, because I was sitting under fluorescents in a school with 3 security cameras in the hall. "And I'm not going hiking." "Good," she said. She gave me her card. "If you need me, you don't need to go through the switchboard." After she left, I walked out to the track and stared at the bleachers where I had spent 1,000 hours with cold wooden planks under me. I had always told students to trust their gut. It was time I honored my own advice. The week of the gala, Thomas began to frame me to others in ways I'd almost missed because of the smoothness of it. "Ev's exhausted," he said to a donor on the phone, loud enough for me to hear. "She's been forgetting things. She's lost weight, the stress, you know?" He brought me tea at 9 at night, staring while I took a sip, like a scientist noting whether a mouse preferred one pellet to another. He commented on my flush after walking up the stairs, on the way I paused to remember where I'd left my keys, on the text I'd forgotten to send. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, then told the neighbor I wasn't. I recorded 3 of those conversations, my phone face down on the counter. I saved them with file names that made sense to no one but me. April_17_kitchen, April_19_mug, April_20_keys. I uploaded them to a cloud account he didn't know, the password a sentence no one else would ever think of because it was nothing but a memory of the way my 6th grade art teacher had taught us to get a straight line by anchoring our little fingers. When the Saturday of the Riverside Literacy Fund Gala arrived, I did my hair as if I were going into battle, which I was. Nikki met me at the venue, a refurbished warehouse with exposed brick and fairy lights, and hugged me like a co-conspirator, even though she only knew the part where I had asked her to check the sound system 3 times. Thomas arrived in his navy suit with a silk tie, and Margaret stepped behind him, taller than him by an inch, her mouth a sharp line of Pinot Red. She carried a black clutch that bulged with paper. "Ev," she said, "happy birthday week." Her eyes flicked over me like a scanner. She reached to side-hug me and then pivoted to greet a city councilman as if we were colleagues. Thomas put his hand on my lower back and squeezed. "A claim. Our company, More and More Contracting, believed in giving back, how our tax write-offs let us do good and grow. He loved a microphone. He loved the way a room went quiet, waiting, the way a moment could be cut into manageable pieces with a good story. He had been telling stories since he was 12. His father left. His mother folded time into crisp squares. He learned to make things sound like they were going to be okay. People ate chicken with capers. They bid on gift baskets and a beach weekend in a condo donated by a cousin of mine who owed me a favor. The MC sang the praises of teachers who stayed late and volunteers who alphabetized books and the two of us for hosting. I shook hands and accepted thanks and watched the clock. Before we get to our final paddle raise, the MC said, beaming, Thomas More would like to share something. Thomas took the microphone and moved to center stage with the ease of a man who has never doubted the shape of a room. He placed his hand over his heart and looked out at the donors, then at our staff, then at me, lingering long enough to make the audience feel like they were in on something private. Friends, he said, it's no secret that Evelyn is the heart of everything good that moves through Riverside. When she came here, the boiler still thought it lived in the 1950s, and the library had shelves that splintered when kids touched them. She wrote grants. She made people believe. She made me believe. He smiled at me, affectionate, and then let sadness move across his face like a passing cloud. But sometimes leaders burn themselves out. Sometimes the people who carry the heaviest loads forget to say when the load is too much. The last few months have been hard on Evelyn. I've watched the woman I love wear herself down to splinters. She won't say it, so I will. After tonight, she's taking a leave to care for herself. Our family is behind her. The district is behind her. And I hope you will be too. I stood with my hands folded and breathed in and out. A sound rose from the audience, a sympathetic hum. Nikki, on the far side of the room, narrowed her eyes in a barely perceptible shake of the head that translated from a mile away. This is not the truth. Thomas pressed the advantage. We've already set wheels in motion. We'll be downsizing, moving out to the cabin in the foothills for a while, building a slower life, and trusting that God turns dashes into commas. He was making a joke about my gravestone gift in a room that didn't know it yet. People chuckled gently at the rhythm of his sentence. Evelyn, he said, gesturing me up with his free hand, you don't have to say anything, but if you do, I do, I said. He handed me the microphone. I held it, a small weight that steadied me. You're right about one thing, I said. The last few months have been hard. Hard like venturing downstairs you've always trusted and finding the bottom step has been shaved down so you fall. Hard like realizing the person who hands you a cup is watching to see if you drink. Thomas chuckled, a supportive husband. That's my Evelyn, he said. Always a poet. I turned to the AV table and nodded once. The lights didn't dim the way movies scripted. They just softened. The fairy lights behind the brick brightened a fraction. On the screen we'd used for our slideshow of students in Halloween costumes, a black square appeared. The audio began grainy, like all truth recorded in a rush. We can't wait much longer, Thomas's voice said into the quiet. No, listen, the premium's already hit. If the window passes, they'll send that nurse again. A few people shifted, uncertain what they were hearing. A few sucked breath. This is private, Thomas said into his mic, attempting to laugh. His voice strained at an edge only I heard at home. The recording continued. Margaret, don't be a martyr. You'll get yours. We clear the debt. We land the Midtown bid. After the claim settles, we're out. On screen, the call ended. On screen, another file began. A photo of the policy letter with my forged signature blown to theater size. The Evergreen Mutual logo large enough to read from the back row. Beneficiary, Thomas A. More, 100%. Not my signature, I said into the room. Not my policy. On screen, a photo of the tablet with Margaret's text. The brake shop can do Monday. No paper trail. There was a sound in the room like weather turning. People set forks down that had nothing on them. I looked at Thomas. His face had gone flat. Everything in him moving calculations into too many places at once. He lifted his chin to perform indignation. This is insane, he said. You've misinterpreted everything. I looked at Margaret. Color had leached from her face down to her throat. She stood utterly still and then, betraying herself, touched the black clutch as if it could fly her away. "Some of you know me because I taught your kids how to read when they were small," I said into the microphone. "Some of you know me because I fought for better ventilation and librarians for schools that weren't yours. I am a woman who makes lists and holds meetings and carries a first aid kit in her purse. I am not a woman who enjoys humiliation, and I do not enjoy standing here. But when a person tries to write the end of your story for you, you either hand them the pen or you take it back." I looked at the projector screen and then at the back of the room where two people in jackets I recognized only vaguely as government stood, steady as posts. "I'm taking it back." A third audio file played, Thomas in the kitchen, gentle and sharp at once, telling me I was tired, that I was forgetting things, that maybe it was time to step back, that he had spoken to HR for me, even about leave. He laughed. On the recording, I did not. The recording included a moment when his voice changed register and he said, "Do you trust me?" And my voice, quiet, "I do not know." There is a moment when a crowd moves from uncertain to certain, when the air tastes like rain that finally falls after a tension of thunder. We reached that moment. The room turned into a jury that didn't speak. Thomas stepped toward me and then stopped because the two people by the door stepped forward, and Walter from Evergreen SIU walked with them, his badge clipped at his belt. "Mr. Moore," he said. His voice carried without a mic. "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding an insurance application filed under your name." "You people have no right," Margaret said, but without much life in the sentence. "You forged my name," I said to Thomas. "You increased the policy you already took out when I wasn't paying attention. You added an accidental death rider. You called your sister to discuss ways to make anything that happens to me look like a mistake. You researched brake shops that would do work without paperwork. You mentioned a generator to cover the cabin. You did all this because you are in debt, because you have a bid you want to look solvent for, because you thought you could have it both ways, my life as a cover and my death as your solution." He stared at me, his mouth a hard line. "You have no proof," he said. "I do," I said. "I have enough." I nodded toward the back, "and they have the rest." "Mrs. Moore," Walter said, "would you like to step aside?" "I would," I said. "But first," I lifted my purse and pulled out a smaller box that looked like a jewelry case. "A gift to show how well I understood yours." I opened the lid and placed the granite plaque gently on the podium, angled so the front row could see. "Evelyn Grace Moore, 1975. "I'm not filling in that line for you," I said. "I'm not letting you finish me." Thomas made a sound that was part laugh, part something else. "You think you're a hero?" he asked, and a tremor crept in. "You think you're the first to be dramatic in front of a crowd? You think you can—" "I don't think," I said. "I know what has happened in my house. I know what has been said in my kitchen. I know what has been signed in my name and planned with my life as the target, and I know I am done." Rachel appeared at my elbow, not to take anything from me, but to stand like a pillar where I could lean if I needed to. "We're done here," she said quietly. "Let them do what they do." The rest did not play like a TV show. There was no handcuff wave to the crowd, no recitation of rights for donors to film. There was a conversation at the back that lasted 20 minutes while the MC filled the time by reminding people that their contributions would change children's lives. A few donors, mortified by the proximity to something real, slipped toward the door, cheeks hot. Others stayed and stood in clusters with their hands around each other's forearms like they needed touch to stay upright. Nikki cried in the hallway and then came back in and began to collect plates like a woman who understood that dignity lives in small acts. Thomas left through the kitchen with Walter and the two officers. Margaret stayed, shaking, and told anyone who would listen that this was unfair, that men were punished for ambition and women were rewarded for hysteria. When no one listened, she snapped her clutch closed and walked out into a night that had finally decided to rain. I drove home alone with the granite plaque in the back seat where a child would have sat. I didn't turn the radio on. The wipers made that steady sound I have loved since childhood, the metronome of a long drive. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the car and sat with my hands on the wheel a long time. Inside, I put the plaque back in the pantry drawer and then brought it out again and slid it under the bed. Then I went to the kitchen, made tea, and watched it steep while the clock clicked the way old clocks do, like a knitting needle through a stubborn sweater. 3 weeks later, I signed papers in a courtroom that smelled like dust and furniture polish. Thomas had been charged with attempted insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. He was out on bond he should not have been able to afford. He did not look at me. He had shaved. He wore his navy suit. Margaret sat behind him with a jaw so tense I could see the muscle work. I signed an order for a temporary restraining order. I signed another for temporary separation of assets. Rachel's hand rested open on the table, and when the judge asked if it was true that I feared harm, I said yes, because truth deserves to be spoken in more than slideshows. 2 months after that, the district placed me on a paid leave I had requested with a letter I wrote myself. I went to the coast and walked a long strip of sand where the tide dragged sea foam like lace. I ate clam chowder with too much black pepper. I read a novel where the people were brave and then cowardly in turns and then simply ordinary. I slept with the door bolted and thought about the ways we share a bed through force of habit and call it love. The case moved like cases move, too slow until suddenly it didn't. Thomas pled to avoid trial. He told the court he had gotten in too deep, that I had misunderstood, that he had never really planned to hurt me, that he had been foolish, not monstrous. The judge, whose eyes looked like mine when she read a policy with the wrong name in the signature block, told him that intent would be inferred from action where action looked like this, that men who wanted money always learned to use words like never to cover for the fact that never had turned into maybe and maybe into how and how into now. He got 7 years. Margaret got probation and forfeiture of funds from her account she swore were hers, but looked suspiciously like delayed payments she should not have received. The Midtown bid went to a competitor who built the library edition on time and donated the change from a cost underrun to our literacy fund in a check I cut a ribbon on but did not speak for. On a bright morning in April, I unlocked my office for the last time. I boxed the framed student drawings and the mug that said "World's Okayest Principal" and the paperweight that looked like a smooth river stone. Nikki helped me carry boxes to my car and cried. "I'm not dying," I said, and we laughed at how good it felt to say an obvious thing. "I want you to move to New Mexico and do something wild," she said. I was thinking Santa Fe, I said. "Do they let women over 50 do wild?" "They beg them to," she said. "They've been waiting." I sold the house. We had equity. I hired a lawyer to make sure Thomas couldn't touch the sale. I sent a check to the literacy fund. So large, the board cried and named the reading room after a teacher who had died of cancer the year before because she would have liked that best. I loaded the car with books and an easel and drove south through the high desert. In Santa Fe, I found an adobe duplex with a courtyard full of chili ristras and birds that sang like someone had wound them up. I bought a dog with mismatched eyes and named him Dash because some dashes belong to us. The art school started small, a room over a pottery studio with skylights and the smell of clay, a handful of women who had been told they were too old for beginnings. We painted self-portraits with blue shadows and a bowl of lemons that glowed like small suns. We brewed coffee in a dented percolator and told one another the stories we had been living in secret. At the end of the month, I hung our work in the hallway and told them they could invite anyone they wanted to come look. They brought sons who had never seen their mothers stand in front of something with pride unadorned by apology. They brought daughters who took pictures and learned to stop deleting the ones where a jawline sagged because a jawline that sags still tells the truth. They brought husbands who tried to stand like support beams and eventually learned to lean. In June, I got a letter postmarked from a prison with a name that made me think of ugly rivers. I set it on the table and walked around it for an hour while Dash watched me watch paper. When I opened it, the writing was Thomas's, but the rhythm was new. "Evelyn, I know I have no right to ask you to read this. I will not ask for forgiveness because I do not believe I have earned the possibility of hearing no. I want to say that I did love you. I want to say that the person I became was a person I made one small compromise at a time, and I called every compromise smart until none of them were. I want to say that you gave me a life I did not know how to honor, and I cut it to pieces to see if the pieces were valuable on their own. I want to say the thing I used to say at parties was true. The part where I said you made me believe, except what you made me believe in was the part of myself I should have kept. I don't expect reply. Live. I mean it this time. Thomas. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer with the title to the Santa Fe duplex and a photo of me at 24 wearing a cardigan too big for me and a ring too big for this world. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel gracious. I felt like a person with a life that fit. In August, I hung fairy lights in the courtyard and invited my students to paint the evening sky. A neighbor named Luis, who made frames from reclaimed wood and smiled like he'd learned the secret of not hurrying, stopped by with a bag of limes he'd been given too many of. He scratched behind Dash's ears and asked about the class schedule. He said he had always wanted to learn to make shade look warm. I said the trick was shadow not being the absence of light, but its companion. He said he thought I was telling him about painting, and I said I was telling him about everything. We sat in the courtyard as the heat left the day, and the sky turned the kind of purple you can never catch with paint. The air smelled of sage and summer dust. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a woman laughed, and it sounded like what it sounds like when someone lifts a stone you thought you had to carry, and you realize you could have set it down yourself. At midnight, I woke and couldn't fall back asleep, not because of fear, but because my mind was too busy with small delights. The dog's feet twitching as he ran through dream fields, the brush I'd left soaking in a jar, the students who would bring cheap wine and their whole hearts to tomorrow's class. I got up and found the granite plaque I had brought with me wrapped in a towel and tucked under a shelf like an old wound. I carried it into the courtyard and set it on the ground under the string of lights. Evelyn. Grace. Moore. 1975. The line waited, but it no longer looked like a knife. It looked like a road, a way to somewhere I hadn't imagined yet. I lifted the brush from the jar, shook it lightly, and drew a small wildflower in my mind just above the dash, not to deface the stone, but to name the empty space for what it was. Possibility. He had thought my story would end in a grave. It began there instead.